Alright, so in this one, as always, we're using the first-person character blueprint that you can get from the first-person template. Let's click on it and press Ctrl-E to edit. Right-click in the event graph and search for Set Movement Mode. As you can see, it's a function that targets character movement component. In the list, among other things, you'll find Flying Movement Mode. We're gonna bind it to left mouse button press. And when we release the mouse button, we're gonna go back to walking. If we press play now and press the left mouse button, we'll see that we can fly, but we can't really go up or down. We're just kind of floating above the ground. And the reason for that, of course, if we look at how our movement input is set up, we'll see that we are only adding movement that is parallel to the ground. As you can see here, we're using the getActorForward and right vector functions. Those basically tell you what direction is forward and what direction is right. And we're using them to determine which way to go when we're pressing WASD keys. They derive that information from our actors transform. And our actors transform is actually our root components transform, which is capsule component. And the capsule is always straight. It never tips over or anything like that. So its forward vector is always parallel to the ground. And so instead of using capsule's forward vector, we're going to be using camera's forward vector. But we'll only be using it if character movement mode is flying. The select vector function will pick camera's forward vector if it's flying and actor's forward vector if it's not. It's basically like a ternary operator. And now we can actually fly around freely. One thing that you'll notice is that after you release the W key, you're still flying a little bit before coming to a full stop. To fix that, select the character movement component and in the details panel, search for braking deceleration flying. Let's set it to 3000. And while we're here, let's also decrease the fly speed. Now the movement is easier to control. In the content drawer, let's create a new blueprint class with actor parent class. And let's call it BP ladder, BP for blueprint. Inside, let's add a box collision component and let's set its collision preset to trigger to make sure that it doesn't block anything. We can make it a little bit bigger. And let's also uncheck hidden in game so that we can see it. Let's drag it into our scene. As you can see, it's really small. We can actually open the ladder blueprint in a separate window so that we can resize it and see our changes in real time in the scene. Now in the first-person character blueprint, let's remove the left mouse button event. And then right-click the capsule component, add event, on component begin overlap. And let's also add on component end overlap. So when the capsule is overlapping, we're going to change the movement mode to flying. But before we do that, we need to check that the other actor is actually a ladder. One way of doing it would be to cast the other actor to the ladder class. And if the cast succeeds, we can proceed and do our things. Here's the thing though, when you run your game and when Unreal loads your blueprint into the memory, it loads not just your blueprint but also everything that your blueprint references recursively. And that includes casts. And it doesn't matter if the cast failed or not. And so let's say you have a game where you have ladders only in the very end of the game, like on level 20, and you have a cast to ladder in your character blueprint. You will load your ladder on level 1. And if your ladder in turn references some other blueprints inside, you would load those as well. And so if you're not careful with this, you can potentially load your whole game in the beginning. And as you can imagine, the load time would be huge. If it was the other way around, if we cast to first-person character from our ladder, it would be just fine, because the character is already loaded all the time. So it definitely doesn't mean that you shouldn't use casts, it just means that you need to pay attention to how you use them. And so instead of using a cast here, we're gonna use a tag. In our ladder blueprint, if we click class defaults, under actor, we can find tags. Let's add a ladder tag. And on overlap on other actor, let's call actor has tag. We're gonna also do that on end overlap, and if it's true, we're gonna change the movement mode. if we press play, we'll be able to fly inside of this collision box. And if we move it a little bit to the wall, we basically already have a functioning ladder. Now, of course, to make it pretty, we need an actual ladder model. So I jumped into Blender, subdivided a plane a couple of times, converted some edges to curves with my add-on, then added some details and exported it in FBX format. Blender is a bit out of scope for this video, but I decided to include it just for continuity, you know? Ladders don't usually pop into existence by themselves. After we import it in Unreal, we can right-click on it and click Edit. Here we can add a collision box and resize it a little bit to roughly match the shape. Then we can drag it into our ladder blueprint and also resize our trigger box. As you can see, the ladder turned out to be too short, but it's not a problem. We can go back to Blender, extend it, and Unreal should re-import it automatically. Now, when we are getting off the ladder on top, there is a small jerk. It may be a bit hard to see, so let me add some geometry on top too. Right when we are getting off the ladder on top, the camera suddenly goes down. That is because the character movement step detection is getting in the way. To fix that, first we're gonna save the max step height to a variable on begin play. And then when we are getting on a ladder, we're gonna set it to 0. And when we're getting off, we're gonna wait for a bit and then set it back to its initial value. And now if we test it, we'll see that the problem is gone. Now, I gotta admit, climbing down these ladders is not the easiest thing to do. It's always been a struggle in classic first-person shooters. For your game, it may be good enough or it may not be good enough. Maybe you want ladders with like proper mount, dismount, and maybe animations. But I guess the point is to just make something working while we're trying to learn Unreal. Like for example, today we learned about casting and gain tags and such. Speaking of tags, cool thing about them is that they are instance editable, even at runtime. So let's say your game world is like partially destroyed, and you have some ladders that are still functioning, and then there's this one ladder that is just lying on the floor and not doing anything. You can use the exact same blueprint for it, and then just remove the ladder tag from it. And then to your character, it's not ladder anymore. It doesn't make you fly or anything. And then of course you can, for example, add a ladder tag to different blueprints. You can have multiple different types of ladders of different sizes and shapes, and they will all behave in the same way. But anyway, we're gonna wrap it up here. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.